Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar from the League of American Orchestras entitled How to Keep Revenue Up as Donor Counts Decline. My name is David Stiers. I'm Director of Learning and Leadership Programs at the League. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is made possible by a generous grant from the Howard Gilman Foundation, as well as in part by public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State legislatures. A few quick technical notes about this Zoom webinar. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you have questions for our speaker, though, please put them in the Q&A box. And you can also find closed captioning live transcript option through the icon in the Zoom toolbar. And also everyone who's registered for today will receive an email with the recording, the slide deck, and follow-up resources and the transcript from this webinar very soon. So we are excited today to welcome our presenter, Katherine Heitz-New, the CEO of RSC Associates. Throughout Kat's 20-year career in arts fundraising, she has earned a much-deserved reputation for her unwavering commitment to results and clarity of vision in helping organizations, and particularly orchestras, achieve significant fundraising growth. It's so wonderful to have you with us today, Kat, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you, David. And thank you to so many friends. I'm seeing folks that I know who are saying hello from the chat. So I see you and I appreciate you and all the work that you do every single day. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can jump in together. There we go. All right. So again, welcome everyone, and truly thank you for taking time for fundraising today. As David said, I'm Katherine Heitz-New, CEO of RSC Associates, and we're just going to jump right in. Let's see. There we go. Let's see if these start to behave. Now they're going to behave. Technology is great when it works, not so much when it doesn't. So for those who don't know us, at RSC, we are focused 100% on revenue generation in the arts. So we've worked with over 150 different arts organizations in more than 100 markets. And you just see a sampling here of the many clients that we're proud to call our friends. I also like to say that we have that national understanding, but a deep understanding of symphony orchestras. About 70% of our clients are symphonies, and so we truly understand your unique business model and your unique donor base. So if you joined us in Salt Lake City when we presented at League Conference, you're familiar with this slide, and I'm not going to take us through it in its entirety, but I did want to start today's webinar with some context, and most importantly, that point in the top left corner, more dollars from fewer donors. So this is first and foremost in some universals that every single orchestra is facing in 2025. This is regardless of size, regardless of budget, regardless of staff, and regardless of artistic scope, facing these three very real challenges in 2025. And the reality in that first point is that the donor base is taking a hit. So while the most loyal are giving more, and for many that is driving revenue growth, less donors are giving. So when you couple that with the hiring challenges and the cash flow crunch, that's pushing more and more orchestras towards that dial, that yellow-red dial that you see on the right. And the reality is that this is not 2020. We are not seeing a large influx of cash from relief funds, and we're not yet seeing a rallying cry on a local level to get behind and support nonprofits. So it's even more imperative that orchestras leverage the most dollars from those fewer donors. And so the tactics to do so are the focus of today's webinar. So in this reality that I just shared, if fewer donors are giving, why is individual giving the answer? And shouldn't I prioritize, say, corporate or foundation or other institutional donors? And the answer is no, and I'm going to tell you why. Individual giving still reigns supreme in revenue generation, okay? And for three main reasons I want to walk you through. The first is that there's a shorter runway to yes, all right? So think of this as one decision maker. Maybe it's a couple that's making the decision as opposed to many, say a committee on the institutional side. And there's also simply less red tape and hoops for you to jump through. The second is that the yes from individual donors is based more on the relationship than it's based on metrics. Think of this as it's based in how the donor feels about you rather than how you stack up in a rating system against other applicants that may have very different missions. Okay. And the third is that it's a larger pool to fish in. Simply put, you have more individual prospects in your community than you have institutional prospects in your community, right? And this larger number of donors, a larger base, if we were in the investment side of this, we would call that a diversified donor base, right? And diversification means less risk and that you're more resilient to changes in how any one of those individual donors respond to you and your organization and your ask from year to year. So if you need convincing of that last point, right, why this larger prospect pool matters and why it lowers your risk and increases your potential, I want you to think of this in terms of math. On one side, you have one $100,000 donor. And on the other side, you have 10 $10,000 donors. Both equal $100,000 in total, right? But let's say that one $100,000 donor, you're able to increase them by $5,000, a $5,000 jump. They give 105. It really only marginally moves the needle. But let's say these $10,000 donors, we get just 50% of them, just half of them to increase by 5,000. So to move from 10 to 15,000, which is a very doable thing if we take some of these tactics that we're going to talk through today. We get those 5 of those 10 folks to move from 10 to 15,000. Now we've increased our take for the annual fund by $25,000, okay? It's just in the math of why that larger prospect pool makes a real difference in your revenue results. The last piece of context that I want to share before we get into specific growth tactics, if you've been around marketing folks lately, you're probably familiar with the marketing mountain. And that's this image here on the right, the more green image. And it's a concept that's replaced the more dated marketing funnel. And simply this concept is that through a series of interactions or impressions, a customer moves up the mountain from really not knowing you, that lack of awareness, to devoted loyalty at the very top. And in reality, this is a relationship mountain, and all strong fundraising is relationship based. And this is especially true of individual giving. So on the left, you're going to see how we've translated this marketing mountain to a donor mountain. And this is probably something you're very familiar with and you understand this concept and you've heard this concept before. The idea that you move a community member to a patron, to a subscriber, to a donor, to a major donor, to then very at the top, maybe a board member or a legacy society member. But why the reason I have it on the screen and I want to talk about this today is that what often gets lost in this model is the importance and the appreciation of the recurring ticket transaction. So I'm going to give you an example of this. I hear a lot of our board members should all be subscribers rather than what we want to and should hear, which is we're proud that our board members are among our most loyal patrons, right? So that appreciation of the recurring ticket transaction. Our counterparts on the retail marketing side, they know the importance of that ongoing transaction. They know how important it is to get customers into the store and buying. And so what I really want to impress upon you as we talk about individual giving today is that there's a symbiotic relationship between consuming classical music and philanthropically supporting it. Not revolutionary information. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. But what I really want to impress upon you is this idea that it translates into real dollars. So we know that if you can get a subscriber to also donate, they are 50% more likely to renew their subscription next season. That is lasting loyalty, and it's the kind that turns into real growing dollars. So all of this to say, the fundraising tactics that we'll review today, they will drive revenue. But sustainable growth needs to be a dual front, where you're focusing both on audience development and retention and donor development and retention. All right, so let's get into the specific tactics that grow individual giving in the current environment. And I'm going to take you what works today, both through the lens of individual major gifts, as well as the annual fund by division. But we're going to start with major gifts, and I'll define that. So these aren't simply large gifts to the annual fund. These are special, heroic level gifts either to special efforts or to a true campaign with a big C, an endowment, a capital, or a comprehensive campaign. And why call out major gifts at the top of this individual giving webinar? Well, it's a few reasons. So first, in light of that cash crunch that the field is experiencing, many orchestras launched campaigns in the last couple of years. And what that means is that they've likely cycled through and made ask and hopefully secured gifts from their top and their best prospects. And now they're at a place where they're reaching more to their major gift level of that special gift campaign. And those prospects who are close, but not on the very inside rung, they are more susceptible to environmental factors. So think economic or market fluctuations or even political fluctuations. And so we want to talk through keys to major gift fundraising today because of that. Many others are thinking about starting campaigns for the same conundrums and the same reasons. And I will give a warning that I gave back in June. It's a really important one because I keep hearing it across the industry, that many think that an endowment campaign alone is going to be the magic bullet. And so what we want you to recognize, and certainly they can be a major force for sustainability, but the success requires four major things: the right leads, the right message, the right leadership, and the right team. But most important that I want you to take away from this current slide is it's that message, right? So endowment campaigns that simply fix a financial problem, they run the danger of what we call black hole fundraising, where millions of dollars are raised, but the organization looks unchanged from the outside. So if you are thinking an endowment campaign is that financial fix, we want you to think about your readiness across all four of those lenses. And of course, we have a resource for you, a free resource on our website. You can email me after the webinar. I'll send it directly to you so you can self-assess that readiness through those lenses. And then the final reason to focus on major gifts at the top of this webinar is that across every blip that we've had within this country, whether that's the dot-com bubble, the Great Recession, the pandemic, we saw a really familiar pattern where broad-based donors either paused or pulled back, and major donors really stepped up to ensure that their beloved arts institutions weathered that tide well. And so that reverse it, more dollars from fewer donors situation that we talked about, it's prevalent. We've seen it reemerge in the last couple of years, and it's really exponentially taken effect in 2025. So as my colleague Jeremy Hatch says, major gift fundraising is the answer. It is the mandate, the opportunity. It cannot wait. All right, so let's talk a little bit about major gifts. And one of the biggest issues that I hear from clients and folks in the field is that they struggle to get the meeting, struggling to get in front of the donor. And so I hear this all the time. I ask, but my donors won't meet with me. So I want to give you clues to how to get through that. And really the takeaway here is to use both interest and influence to get the meeting. There are three major types: The first is time. So it sounds like we have a pressing opportunity to share, or we have an opportunity now that I know will interest you. Okay, I really love that. It's an opportunity today, and I know you're especially going to be interested in hearing about it and helping us with it. So I'll give you a real life example of this. We're working with a client now on a capital campaign. It is a true building project for a major renovation of a historic theater. And their version of this is that there's a national funder that's interested in giving them a $500,000 gift. Okay. But they have to raise 70% of their goal before that funder will officially consider their request. So they're at 50% to goal now. And so this summer, right now, what they're working is to move the needle from 50 to 70% using that $500,000 as a carrot to those donors to make their gift now in order to help them reach that 70% mark, unlock that $500,000, which the foundation will allow them to use as a matching challenge. And then they'll be able to turn that out to the rest of the community and top off the final bit of the campaign. So, timeliness, why your gift matters, making it really kind of manufacturing a positive sense of urgency of why giving now is important. Okay. The second piece of this is prestige, right? So it sounds like I want you to be among the first to know, or we have an opportunity and you're one of the few people that can make it a reality. You can also think of this as the seek advice approach. So we're working on something special and I wanted to get your take on it before we lock it in, right? So that idea of I really do want to come and sit down with you and seek your advice. The final piece of influence is simply leverage, right? And most often it's a person they revere. So a respected board member or your music director asks for the meeting. So getting that meeting with the major donor, it's so crucial. All right, so closing major gifts despite the uncertainties of 2025, and nobody's going to sugarcoat those for you. We recognize that when donors have questions, when donors are concerned, when donors are uncertain, they do tend to close their wallets. But I want to be clear that major gifts can be closed despite this, and can be closed in those uncertain times. Among our client base alone, we're averaging about $2 million plus gifts per month in 2025. So you can close major gifts. You're simply going to encounter more questions, more hesitation, more barriers than usual in your path to them. So think of this more as you'll hear more not nows than nos in uncertain times. So, what are the keys to success to getting through those? So, the first is to listen, always listen, and establish benchmarks. So, if a donor says not now, don't leave that timing ambiguous. I often talk about this as the awkward dance after a date of how long do I wait to call the guy or the girl. There's a reason entire movies are based around it because it's so awkward. So don't get into that. Really establish that up front. And you could do so by asking questions like, do you have a sense of when you'd like to revisit the conversation? When will it be right for you to revisit the conversation? And if they say not now because of something that's very environmental, very outside of your control as a symphony board member or administrator, such as the economy or the market, a great question is what turning point or indication do you need to see to revisit the conversation? Because in such an environment, who knows when folks are going to feel comfortable? So don't leave that timing ambiguous. Establish those benchmarks. The second key is to provide flexibility. So if a donor is saying they can't make a commitment now, give them that flexibility. And the simplest form is time, okay? So it sounds like many of our donors are in the same place. And recognizing that their support is crucial, they've chosen to pledge now and pay over the next 3 to 5 years. Would that make you more comfortable? Another alternative is many have chosen to pledge what they can confidently give now and keep the door open for a larger conversation when things are more certain. Would that be something you'd consider? I want to pay special attention to two closing questions I just used there. And I really want to highlight them and go slow so you can write them down. Would that make you more comfortable? And is that something you'd consider? We love these and we refer to them as closing questions because basically it allows you to put that ask very clearly on the table with the donor, but then give them a question that they can easily say yes to in the conversation. Yes, I can consider that. Yes, that would make me more comfortable. Let me go back and talk with my financial planner about that. So it gives them a yes today while it still allows them some time and space for the greater consideration of that larger ask. I'm going to give you another real life example. So we had another client that was seeking a $500,000 gift. This was for a pure endowment campaign. And there was a donor that had hesitations about that level of commitment in such an environment. They very specifically had market concerns. How are my investments going to do? I'm not sure that I'm going to have the cash flow to resource such a commitment. And so what they did is they committed instead to $125,000 over the next 5 years, what they could confidently give now, because they knew that that gift, that cash and that commitment now was important to the symphony. And then at an event a couple of weeks later, the donor sought them out to say, in due course, I think we could probably do more. So, really, that idea of give now, pay later, give what you can confidently give now, and then let's keep that door open for the larger conversation. Flexibility, it's so important. Then finally, the piece that I want you to think about is staying ahead of objections. Okay. So another way to think about this is that put those objections clearly on the table, put them out in the open. Don't guess about them, address them head on. So it sounds like we want to be sensitive to the situation while moving forward boldly so that we can do both. Can you share? And then ask specific questions about their decision making process. Okay. So that might be what else they need to see or know from you. What next step do you see as you consider this request? It might be timing considerations. It might be who else needs to be involved in the conversation. Do they need to involve a spouse, a partner, a financial advisor, an estate planner? Okay. The big takeaway, the theme across all three of these must do's to close major gifts is that they were means of navigating the donor's response, right? They didn't happen in a vacuum. We asked, the donor responded, and then we had a go to response to that. We navigated their uncertainties. So the major takeaway is that the most important key here, right, is that major gift success is based in continuing to ask. Don't let fear get in the way of continuing to ask with confidence, okay? All right, so we want to talk also about the annual fund, our core operating revenue, and our pipeline of donor relationships. I'm going to take you through the top three fundraising best practices for every division of the annual fund right now. Think of these really as your must-dos, right? I want you really to think of it more like a checklist. So I'm going to share the top three best practices that every organization can and should apply. These are three musts, regardless of budget or staff size. And if you're doing it, wonderful. Pat yourself on the back because you truly deserve it. This is hard work. I'm not going, there are three, they're the top three, but it's still very difficult to put these in place and maintain them. So if you're doing them, wonderful, take the win. If you're not, I need you to figure out how to layer it in now. I also want to think about how we handle all this volume of work, right? So I get a lot of questions around, Kat, you gave me 14 different must do's. How do I handle all of this? So I want you to think of the takeaways from this, not necessarily as doing more, but strategically targeting specific prospect pools with the right tactics throughout the year. So think of it as you're working every single day on fundraising, but not on every single day is the same prospect, the same prospect pools, or the same tactics. So these are sequenced throughout the year, okay? The final level set that I will share is that I'm going to focus on solicitation fundamentals because it is the top request, the top question that we get, especially in 2025. But we have many resources on our website, and then I'm happy to share with you around stewardship and cultivation as well. Okay, so let's start with the board. How do we optimize giving from our directors and our trustees? The first piece that I want you to think about is no blanket appeals. So whether this is a minimum in your bylaws or handing out pledge forms at a board meeting, just stop it. Okay, it is not an effective way to maximize your board giving. These are your most loyal supporters, and those kinds of blanket appeals really treat them like a herd versus individuals. All right, if it's not abundantly clear, you must sit down with every single member of your board one-on-one and have a conversation about their support. It is imperative. I'm sure that you could tell from that first point that we are not fans of board minimums. And David and I were just talking about this before we started the webinar. We like board minimums even less if you call them board dues. And the problem with them is, yes, they absolutely create a barrier to entry, which is a problem. But more profoundly, they allow members that could give more to be comfortable with checking a smaller box. So that's a major issue if your goal is revenue generation. I'm going to give you a real life example of this. So we had a client that had one of the community's top philanthropists on their board. And without hesitation, without doubt, he was one of the first in with his board minimum of $2,500 every single year. And so this client knew there was greater capacity, certainly even greater propensity. He wanted to give more than that. But rather than having that conversation and following some of these guides, historically what the organization had done is approach him with special projects, specifically touring and recording in order to increase his annual giving. And certainly those gifts were underwriting very real operational costs for the symphony. The problem came when they had a new strategic plan and the artistic vision and direction of the organization moved away from touring and recording. So now there was literally tens of thousands of dollars at risk from this donor in the operating budget. And so what do you do? So even if you have board minimums in your bylaws, how can you navigate that, right? To encourage that maximum, that greatest capacity giving. What we encourage you to do is to lean into context in your conversations. So there are three major points of context. The first is their own history. So this sounds like you've generously given $2,500 in the past. You know this is an important year for us. And so we ask you to consider increasing to $5,000 to ensure we have the resources to succeed, okay? So based in their own history, you gave this, we're asking for that because it's so important and critical this year. The second one is top three positioning. And this is really most applicable for new board members, so establishing their gift level for the first time. And it sounds like as a board member, we ask that you consider your support as one of your top three philanthropic gifts for the year. All right, so that context within their own giving among your top three gifts. All right. And then the third is share your average board gift. Simply, on average, our board gives $3,250 to the annual fund. So that context or that level set within their peers on the board. All right, so those 3 points. I also want you to think about within board giving is to use their support to inspire others. And this really isn't about 100% board participation. Other than a handful of grantors, nobody really cares. And so what it is about is demonstrating what's possible with a groundswell of support. All right, and the board should certainly be a source of that kind of groundswell, right? So there's some simple ways that you can do this. Uh, the most simple one is simply thanking them publicly for their generosity. It's a simple way to inspire others, and I promise it's one of the things that builds confidence in your organization. Wow, that board is incredibly supportive and behind the organization. It changes people's perspective of you as a worthy place to invest their support and their time. The second is simply pulling their gifts into a board matching challenge. We love this tool. We like to say matching challenges motivate on both sides of the coin. They motivate those that build the match or give the match, and then they motivate those that give currently in order to unlock it. It's all basically a positive sense of time urgency, right? Why giving now matters, either to build the pool or to unlock the matching challenge pool. So the key here really is to use their generosity as a proof point of their value, of your value, and your appeal to others to join them. I have this slide as a really special bonus because one of the major questions that I also received just hand in hand with how do I optimize board giving is how do I activate the board in individual giving, right? And if you've tried everything, I want to give you two tips because the board is especially effective in individual giving. All right. So the tip number one, and my friends around the country who are joining today have heard me say this many times, but don't try to eat the entire sandwich in one bite. And this is applicable in a couple of instances. The first is trying to get every single board member to become an asker or to take on the role of the development committee. It's not possible. Attempting to do so will result in you just chasing after and prodding disengaged board members than fully leveraging committed ones, right? And the reality is that if every single member of your board said, yes, I want to be an asker, it would be too much for your organization to manage. So we recommend that you aim for 3 to 5 highly leveraged board members. So a little chaser catism on this is only race the horses that will run. Those 3 to 5 that are ready to go, have the right sphere of influence, and you can really activate and get them to a place where they're productive and fulfilled. Okay. The second instance where this applies is trying to tap the entire potential of a board member's Rolodex. I suppose that the more modern term for that would be their Gmail contacts. And so it's similar to our first instance that it results in wasting precious time chasing unproductive leads, right? It's also so overwhelming to the board member to think of the entirety of their contacts and their pools and their friends and their colleagues that they never get off the starting blocks, right? And as many of you have heard me say, hesitation and fear is a recipe for fundraising failure. So what we recommend is that you start with their top 3 prospects. The perfect filter for this, and I'll slowly say this and I'll repeat it another time, is who do you think you can get to a yes most quickly? All right, of all of those friends and all of those colleagues that you have, who do you think you can get to a yes most quickly? Once you've worked through those top 3, those first 3 leads, you certainly can launch the next group, but don't try to eat the entire sandwich in one bite. Second tip, don't become a victim of the bystander effect. So what is the bystander effect? So there was a study and it simply goes that you're in a public place and someone in your party has a medical emergency and you yell out, someone call 911. No one will. And the reason is that they perceive themselves as bystanders. I'm not directly involved. Someone else will do it. Surely they did not mean me. But if you point to someone and you say, you, Bob, call 911, they reliably will, okay? So the point here is that a blanket call to action at a board meeting is not as effective as a personal call to action to individual members. You can certainly set the context in a meeting, but be sure to do that individualized follow-up work, okay? Simply put, I want you to make sure they know they're special. You're one of the few people that can help make this successful. It takes a little more time up front, but I promise you it will be worth it.
Kat,
All
just a
right.
follow-up question.
Yes.
chat about
Yeah.
the not giving board pledge forms. The asker has said that they think they actually do that, but they are tailored based on the individual board members' giving history. So is there sort of like a way to do pledge forms, but as long as you do that individual focus, as you just mentioned, it could still work.
It could still work. So a variation that we see on that is sometimes you send either a letter, or you're providing this in person. You're handing that pledge form to that person, and so it provides the context for the ask first. But the key is that individualized follow up work. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Thank
Of course, yeah. All right, so major individuals. And I will start this section with a qualifier. The difference between a broad-based prospect and a major prospect is going to be different for some shops. For some, it's going to be $500. For some, it will be $5,000. So I want you to always start with your 80. If you don't know that inflection point between who are my major donor prospects and who are my broad-based prospects, start with your 80-20 rule to define yours. So what's that inflection point where the top 20% of your donors are giving 80% of the dollars? So from there, drop back a couple of rungs and to a logical cutoff point. And why drop back? Because you want to make that room for entry-level major gifts. And why even make the distinction between broad base and major individuals to begin with? And it's really about time, which is our most precious commodity as administrators and volunteers for symphony orchestras. We have to plan our tactics according to our time resources and our people resources. So think of this as major individuals. They've graduated to a personal level of relationship building. And broad-based individuals, they receive a systematized version of relationship building. Okay. And we're going to talk about both of those in the next 5-10 minutes or so. All right. So, first major key must do within major individuals is starting by identifying and qualifying your prospects. Personal relationship building, as I've just spoken about, is time consuming work. And so you have to focus your energies and be very clear on who. So if you're wondering where to start, I just walked you through the simplest way to do so. Define that distinguishing line between major individuals and broad base. Review who's been giving to you at or near those levels. And I see a lot of organizations that are obsessed with other people's money. They're pouring through peer organizations program books and they're snapping pictures in lobbies of peer organizations, donor walls, while they ignore or take for granted the people already giving generously to them. So I want to be clear that your current, your renewing, and your lapsed donors are your best prospects for immediate increased dollars, okay, within your sphere. The second piece that I want you to think about is in-person asks. So we just covered this a bit in board giving, but it translates also and is absolutely imperative within major individual giving. You can start by asking to meet in person. Certainly if someone says, can we Zoom? Can we have a phone call? That's perfectly fine. What we want you to do is personalize this follow-up, right? And personalize the ask and the conversation. And that's really the key word here is conversation, right? I want you to think of that conversation in two key parts. First, sharing updates. You need to catch them up on what's happening with your organization and what's exciting and what's in the future. But I also want you to use engaging questions. And really, it's that second piece, the engaging questions, that I find a lot of times fall short in these kinds of donor conversations. The goal is to create an exchange or a dialogue. So engaging questions, the second piece of that, I'm going to give you some examples in a moment. But why they are so effective is that they change the donor's role to an active participant in the conversation. It's the difference really from pitching from a stage and building a relationship, okay? So engaging questions sound like, which of our priorities is most important to you? It's so simple, right? It's easy for the donor to answer, and it lets you find out a lot about what matters to them and what motivates them philanthropically. Another engaging question is, as we look to next year, what are you most excited about? right? It's a great clue to what they might sponsor or underwrite. So these engaging questions, just simple things that draw out information from them, pausing in the sharing of you sharing information and checking in with them. What do you think of that? How does that motivate you? How does that sound? What's most important to you in that, right? So that dialogue or that exchange. The final piece I want you to think about within major individuals is leaning into their motivations, okay? So people give for a variety of reasons, but everyone is more motivated by one of these three drivers. You see them in our little bubble here to the right. So the first is what it does for them. With this type of donor, I want you to lean into benefits and recognition. They like their name and lights, okay? They really like that donor lounge or that VIP parking space where they don't have to go park in the parking deck and walk through in order to get to the concert hall. What philanthropy does for them, benefits and recognition. Second, what it does for the organization. So with this donor, you're going to be leaning into how the gift will advance your mission, your work, or your sustainability, right? These are the people that understand, I want to be sure the symphony is here for future generations, what their philanthropy does for the organization. And then finally, what it does for the community. All right. So with this donor, lean into your educational programming, your economic impact, maybe how you impact downtown vibrancy, or how your work aligns with the community's goals and the community's aspirations. So their gift to your orchestra does for the community. And I want you to think of each one of these three. They're really spears of value propositions, right? But they're all just arrows in a quiver, right? You don't shoot all of them at once. As I said, every person will value them somewhat, but they'll be more motivated by one out of the three. And so I want you to think of this as selecting the right ones for each donor. And this is really another reason why those personal meetings, the personal ask, and the personal follow up, it's so crucial. Okay. All right, broad-based individuals. So the other 80% of our donor pool. And while they don't make up the majority of the dollars raised, they are absolutely critical to your fundraising program. Why? Because they are the pipeline of future major gifts. And if you don't believe me, I'm sure friends of mine across the country that are listening have heard me quote this, but I'm going to quote the Harvard story. So, Harvard, they're pretty good fundraisers, right? They did a study. They simply looked at all of their donors, every person that had ever given them a gift of $1 million plus. And I'm not talking lifetime giving of $1 million plus, one-time gifts of cash gifts of $1 million plus. And every single one of those donors, without fail, without exception, started with a first time gift of $100 or less, right? So ignore the broad base at your peril because they are your future major gifts. So the keys here really, it starts with the same as our major individuals. I want you to start by answering who. All right. So recency matters. This is a trend that is a post-pandemic trend. It trumps all the other trends that we used to think about from the broad base. Recency matters. It is the most important driver of the yes within broad base. So I want you to think about this very simply. If they attended any time in the last 2 years, or they gave since the pandemic, you need to be asking them for an annual fund gift. And I'm going to get more specific about that in just a moment. So also just coupled with that, frequency of your ask matters. We want you to think and put into action 4 waves of appeals throughout the year. The goal really here is to get your best donors in first. And yes, I mean renewals from the beginning of the fiscal year and the beginning of the season, regardless of when they typically give. Okay. What this does is it front loads your fundraising. It gets a yes from your best donors in first. It allows you to send more appeals to those that need persuasion, and it allows space for a second ask to your best donors. So I get the question a lot when I talk about this of, wait, Kat, are you telling me that regardless if they make a gift, I still need to send them a letter 4 times a year? No. And the easiest way to really demonstrate this is to walk you through the major segments. So three major segments within your broad-based appeals and your broad-based letter campaigns. The first, none of these will be a surprise. The first are renewing donors, right? So a lot of folks refer to these as LIBUNs, last year but not this year. The second are lapsed donors. So some refer to this as SIBUNs, some years but not this year. They gave 2 to 4 years ago but not since. And then the third is acquisition, right? So those subscriber non-donors or people who act like them. So we often include multi-single ticket buyer non-donors in our acquisition leads. When any one of those segments, a renewing donor, a lapsed donor, or an acquisition donor, when any one of those segments makes a gift, they become a current donor, right? And that's a different segment. And they're not included over here in our pools, in our leads list for direct mail, all right? So we aren't going to ask them again, except in a very intentionally messaged second ask appeal in the springtime. We give them some rest time between that ask, and then we go back in the spring and we say very intentionally, make an additional gift. Okay. So 4 waves of direct mail a year. I also in broad base, I want you to think in campaigns versus channels. So I hear a lot about, lamenting social media campaigns while organizations aren't sure when they're going to send their next letter. And that is siloing direct response rather than coordinating it so that it works together as a communications campaign. And I'm going to put a stake in the ground. RSC firmly believes in this, and we see this time and time again, regardless of organization size. Direct mail reigns supreme. So in the most high functioning programs, direct mail generates about 2/3 of broad-based revenue, while online email, telefunding, add-on gifts, all of those combined create that other third, okay? So if you do nothing else, I want you to solicit your broad base, making sure that you're mailing to them at least 4 times a year. I also want you to think about the reality that direct mail lifts all other channels. So again, thinking in terms of a campaign that leads with direct mail, but is chased and supported by other channels like email or social media. And what those things do is, regardless, they may never click through, but a lot of times, because direct mail still reigns supreme and people really like returning that response device, what happens is that email or that social media, it's more of a reminder to go get that direct mail envelope off of what I call the proverbial stack on the kitchen counter. Everyone has the stack. I'm going to get to it one day. Well, that email is what makes them go get to it today. All right. Okay. So final piece here that I want you to think about is committing to your next steps. You have just taken an hour. We're going to spend a little time in Q&A as we wrap up today. But you've just taken an hour to talk about what's working in fundraising right now. So commit to your next steps. And I hope that you really feel good about some of the fundamentals that you already have in place, and that it gives you good direction on how to refine or get others into place. So it's so easy to walk away from this and just return to the status quo. So here's my tips on how to not do that. I want you to remember that these were 3 musts, regardless of budget or staff size by division. So don't let barriers get in your way. Sometimes we hear a lot of excuses of why that won't work for us. We've worked with 150 different arts organizations and worked through those barriers with every single one of them. There is a pathway to this working for your organization. The second is really, again, just condense it down into a simple set of 3s. Obviously, we like 3s. So do the work. Take your top 3 takeaways and get them in place in the next 90 days. If you commit to doing that, it's the key to making sure it doesn't languish or wither on your to-do list. And if you are still overwhelmed or confused, or you have a major barrier that you think, Kat, you just have never heard of what I'm dealing with, and it's very real and it's very complex, I'm happy to connect with you. So I'm going to say hello to I know there's a special group of development committee members that have all gathered together in a Texas town to watch this together today. So hello to all of you. They took me up on this offer after our league conference session, and I'm meeting with them. I've met with them a couple of times and meeting with them next week, all for free, to talk about what they're trying to accomplish as a development committee as they move their orchestra forward. So I really mean it. I'm happy to connect with you and talk with you about your unique situation and how you can apply these principles, these fundamentals today to the work that you're doing. Okay. All right. So David, I know you've been keeping an eye on the Q&A section. Should I stop screen sharing so we can look at each other
Yes,
and go through some of those questions? I'll do that.
absolutely. Can you repeat the three musts that you just went through? Those three
Sure.
steps.
Yeah. Yeah. So the three musts were really three musts by each division. So we went through those three musts for the board, for broad base, and for major individual giving. So think of those as three musts by division for each. And I know we're going to share this webinar from both a video standpoint as well as a slide share standpoint. So they'll have all of those three documented for each division. Yeah.
And then can you repeat again about the direct mail 4 times a year? Do you
Yeah.
suggest asking current donors 4 times a year or only renewing lapsed donors?
Yes. So great distinction. So there's only three segments that you mail to. Renewing, which means they gave last year but not this year. They're not current. Lapsed, which means they gave 2 to 4 years ago, not this year, so not current. And acquisition, they've never given, and so not current, right? So your current donors, they get pulled out of those leads. A lot of times, what we the folks who get really into the data will call that suppressing the current donors, right? So if they've made a gift this year, they come out of those leads lists. The one exception is that second ask towards the end of your fiscal year, where you're very intentional in saying, make an additional gift this year.
And is there anything you think that should be particularly included in those direct mail pieces?
Oh, that's a great question. So we always want you to lead with value versus need, right? So we want you to think about your value proposition as an organization. I'm sure folks have heard me talk about the most prevalent needs-based appeal that we hear is your ticket only accounts for X amount of our expenses. And it's a really needs-based kind of appeal. So we want you to lean into your artistry, your value in the community, and the people in the community's response to you, right? So definitely lead with value. Chase with benefits, right? So that's a way to bring home what their support may mean to them. What we understand is that early in a donor relationship, a lot of that philanthropic motivation is more transactional. I'm giving at $100 because I like seeing my name in the program book, or I'm giving at $500 because I like being able to come to the rehearsals. I really love seeing behind the scenes like that. So some of that early broad-based giving is transactional, and so what we often see is a benefits buck slip. But I think the most important message and takeaway for crafting those direct mail appeals is to say thank you and to include the donor in the conversation. I read a lot of drafts that are very us talking about ourselves. They're very navel gazing, right? We do all these great things. And I'm so glad we're proud of ourselves. We should be proud of ourselves, right? But you really want to include that donor in the conversation. Thank you for being a patron. Because of you, we can put this great artistry on the stage. Because of you, we are also educating students in classical music, so make it really about them. And if you start the beginning of that direct mail appeal and that letter and that messaging of making them a part of the narrative of your value, then the transition to the ask is really simple. So continue to do so. Make your gift today. Yeah.
Right. And you just mentioned a letter.
Yeah.
Are there any other mailing formats people should be thinking about, or what you
Yeah.
think is most effective for mail?
Y- Yeah, it's a really great question. So, people, and have tested this a lot over the years, as you can imagine. People do really still respond to that letter campaign, right? There's a very deep sense of I give when I get my letter from the symphony. We hear that all the time from donors. We even hear that sometimes from board members. And so that idea that it's a letter, very simple setup, a letter with some kind of response device, so some ability for them to check the box and fill in information, and a return envelope for that response device and maybe that check that they send. Sometimes, especially around major campaigns, so end of calendar year giving, sometimes we will see clients, and it is helpful, especially if you have a very large leads list, right? Yeah, huge volume that you're getting to, and you just need to get in front of people more in a less expensive way. So instead of sending, say, four is the minimum direct mail waves, but instead of sending 6 or 7 waves of direct mail, they'll send email or snail mail postcards in between those. So, but they really are those direct mail campaigns. We think there should be 4 letters a year.
So do you have any tips for coordinating any direct mail campaigns with email campaigns with telefunding in terms of sequencing? And have you
Yes.
seen younger donors and younger generations responding differently to direct mail versus digital?
Yeah, great questions. So as I said, direct mail lifts all other channels, right? And so if you do direct mail, all of a sudden your email campaigns are actually going to be more successful. It's really funny because people think there are these two, this demographic responds to email and this demographic responds to direct mail. It's just not that way. It's the frequency. It used to be a thought that people needed to have 7 impressions before something really took hold in their mind. And today, that number they're estimating is more like 17. So the advice here, lead with direct mail. Direct mail has a lifespan. It can sit on that kitchen counter and still be alive and viable for about 4 weeks. Then hit with a direct mail chaser or an email chaser. So 4 weeks, an email chaser, maybe 2 to 4 more weeks after that, a second email chaser. And that would be the same timeline after the direct mail has been sent that you would have telefunding really ramping up to those same leads that are there. Telefunding it reigns supreme in acquisition. There's just something that can be said in those conversations with our donors that, as a colleague once said to me, there's no letter can answer the kinds of questions that come from many of our acquisition leads. And so the telephone conversation is really important, but it's all part of the campaign, and it's really running somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks post drop of your direct mail. Does that make sense?
Yes, and how do you incorporate social media like Instagram or Facebook into the digital campaign?
Yep, absolutely. So in that same timeline, right? That would be a good time to have a boosted social media campaign. Email. Facebook and Instagram do seem to be the predominant ones. If you're only going to do one, do Facebook. And I think the key here is, and I always get this wrong, but it's a marketing sense of I think it's cope, but I always worry about that third letter. It's create once, put everywhere. But this idea that you create the content for all of this messaging when you create that letter draft, right? So that's the from the imagery that you include in that letter to the copy, it's going to feed into all of those other things. So it's the copy for your email, just a variation on that. It's the copy for social media, etc. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Actually, you don't want to because you want that messaging in that to be sticky so that they have that aha moment of, yes, I got that letter and I meant to make that gift.
And could you again talk about the sequencing of the 4 times? So it's 4 times, but once someone has given, they become current donors as
Yep,
opposed to the sequencing of the other 4. But you
that's
still
right.
might ask for an additional gift later.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's think of it in terms of direct mail one, two, three, and four. Okay. So direct mail one usually goes out around the beginnings of our season. So September, October. All right. So let's say you had 1,000 leads in that direct mail. You sent 1,000 letters out and 200 people responded. Now direct mail two, which typically goes out around mid-November as the lead to an end of calendar year giving campaign, it's now going to 800 donors, right? Or 800 leads, right? Because those 200 that gave to direct mail one are not going to receive direct mail two, right? Direct mail three and four typically are your spring. So direct mail three usually is somehow sequenced around your subscription campaign, right? So depending on um, when your subscription campaign launches, direct mail three usually is somewhere between February, March, maybe even April. And the direct mail for the final one of the year is usually within May, so that you have time enough for that to work before what is most of our end of fiscal years, which is June 30th. So it's that direct mail three and direct mail four, where there's 200 that gave to direct mail one can be included as an intentional second ask. You gave earlier in our season, would you consider an additional gift to help us with X? So usually that's more of a community or an education based ask, but they can be included in those.
And what do you think about the end of the year ask or the happy holidays? How do you sequence that in, particularly for
Yes.
tax purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we want you to do is think about that as a really robust time where you're asking and you're leading again with your value proposition. You're chasing that with your benefits, what they receive from becoming a donor to your organization. I don't want you really to lead with the idea of it's that time of year to give. That's a very crowded space, right? So and we really shouldn't compete in that because we can compete on our value and our uniqueness as vibrant arts organizations. For most of us, the top arts organization in our community, I would so much rather you lean into that than this is the time of year you always give, right? So that really is more messaging that takes the donor for granted, and don't do that. Thank them and thank them for what they make possible, and ask them to continue that support.
Several questions about
Yeah.
the criteria for when to stop pursuing a certain donor. Is there an expiration date on a lapsed donor?
Yeah, there is. And I will say, we do like long lapsed donors. We do like to include them, maybe not in all four waves of direct mail, but maybe include some long lapse, so 5 to 7 year lapsed in direct mail too, because it's going out right at the lead to that end of calendar year that end of calendar year giving campaign, right? So it does tend to be a time where giving is on people's minds. The reason we like long leads only once, don't invest in them in all four waves. Really, it's 2 to 4 years is the max that I would say for all four waves for most orchestras. There could be exceptions that your data tells us, but for most organizations, that 2 to 4 years for all four waves. The reason that we would say include them once is that there are real dollars in long lapsed. We are always surprised with clients we work with where they'll have a $5,000 gift, a $10,000 gift come in via direct mail from a long lapse donor. So they tend not to have high conversion rates. So it's not a high volume of long lapse donors that are giving, But a lot of times we'll see a long lapse donor kind of come on board and say, oh, wow, I've not been giving in a while and I've meant to, and here's a big check. So there's real dollars there.
Um, and I know we're a little bit past the top of the hour, but
Okay.
if you're still willing to go, and I'm happy to see so many people still hanging on, we'll keep
Yeah,
talking.
I'm happy
Um,
to. Yeah.
so you mentioned about a lot of the value proposition. How do
Mhm.
you know what value proposition will move a donor?
Oh, that's a great point. Well, it's part of those engaging questions, right? It's why I really talk about having an exchange or a dialogue. I love that question around which of our priorities is most important to you. A lot of times, if you, as an arts organization, are building a strategic plan, there's going to be kind of a reflection of all three of those, right? There's going to be an artistic arm, there's going to be kind of a community and a education based arm, and there's going to be some kind of fiscal responsibility or sustainability arm. And so those kinds of things are really nice keys of what to really delve deeper in, and it's why I encourage you not to go in with your pitch deck. An elevator pitch, I mean, I suppose they're fine because elevators are short rides usually, and that then you stop talking and you allow the donor to talk. But really make sure that you're giving them the time, the space, and asking them questions so they can talk, so you know what to get back to them. Yeah.
That sounds like timing's a big issue. So,
Hmm.
for example, how does the timing of direct mail ask fit in with solicitation, say for events? Or do you have
Um,
the many asks plus multiple events create donor fatigue? Or say you're launching an endowment campaign at the same time as the year-end appeal. How do you recommend sequencing and timing all these different asks?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to manufacture it intentionally. It is part of understanding each unique pool within your donor base. So, for example, with the question around a major gift campaign and the annual fund, right? So the reality is that most major gift campaigns last about 18 to 24 months. And they're a very focused effort. They're really only focused on the top 20% of your donors. So you're likely not in a public phase or a phase where there might be a dual ask between annual fund and campaign with 80% of your donors. With that 80% of your donors, keep asking them for the annual fund as you always would. With your 20% of your donors who are prospects for both the campaign and you need to renew their annual fund support, you need to combine it intentionally in an ask. So have that conversation all together. We'd like to ask you for a campaign gift of $100,000 and to continue your generous annual fund support over the next 5 years at $10,000. Put it on a grid, on a simple piece of paper for them so they see it in black and white and really understand it fully. Um, we have worked with clients who've run major gift campaigns that have cannibalized their annual fund, all with the best of intentions of saying, we hope you'll consider this gift in addition to your annual support. But laying it out really clearly and making it a comprehensive ask is the way that you ensure there's no confusion, there's no going back on that. You're just very upfront with the donors. Yeah.
Great. I think we'll wrap up with two last questions, but I
Yeah.
know Kat is easily accessible. And if you want to put in the chat, Kat, your email address
Yep.
again and your website for people who do
Yep.
want to follow up with you. Two last questions. Do you think that donors are likely to commit to multi-year pledges given perceived volatility of the market?
Absolutely. So just dropped my email address there, and then just the handle there is our website. So rscrevenue.com. And then let me get that out of the way so that I can see. And David, I was typing, ask me that
Oh,
question
no,
one
that's
more
fine.
time. Yeah.
So multi-year gifts with perceived volatility of the market right now.
Yeah, yeah. It is one of those pieces that we do. We do see greater hesitation, that maybe I'm not comfortable in making that multi-year pledge right now, lock in their renewed or their increased annual support. So always think about that as going back. So if you approach a donor, say, with, would you consider a gift of $10,000 a year over the next 3 years? And they said, I'm really not sure that I can commit to that. That's great. Would you make a commitment today to renew your support of $10,000 so we know we're confident for the rest of this fiscal year? So always come back with them. If a donor says, I'm not really comfortable with that, come back and make them feel really good about an alternative. Put something clearly on the plate for them, and give them an alternative. Sometimes we talk about this as an option of two yeses. And it's a really effective tool. But yes, there's more hesitation. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for it. Those multi-year asks and locking those major gifts in is really helpful, especially if you're in a campaign environment where they're making a multi-year gift to your campaign.
And then we're 15 weeks away from Giving Tuesday. How do you feel about it as a motivator? Is it a must-have, or is it maybe less important
Yeah,
now?
yeah. So, and this is an RSC party line. If you ask anyone on our team, from our founder Bob to me to our colleagues, we're going to tell you the same thing. The greatest issue with not doing a Giving Tuesday campaign is you're going to hear it from someone, and most likely it's going to be a board member who says, "Wait a minute. I got all these Giving Tuesday emails and the symphony didn't send out one. Are you guys not fundraising? What's going on over there?" So you're going to hear it. So we do want you to do a Giving Tuesday campaign, but we really want you to streamline it. It should be part of that end of calendar year giving campaign. It should lead with a direct mail that goes out first. And think of your Giving Tuesday campaign simply as the social media chaser that helps lift that direct mail. So typically we're looking with most of our clients, we're advising, depending on size and scope, anywhere from 2 to 3 boosted posts over that time, and maybe some email chasers that are particular to Giving Tuesday around it. So it's not comprehensive. We don't want you spending a lot of time creating content. We see a lot of content created specifically for Giving Tuesday. We'd so much rather we're content creators, we're artists. We create art all the time. So we'd rather you use your great art and your great people and your great musicians already, and interactions that your audience has with them already, to feature those within your Giving Tuesday rather than spending a lot of time creating kind of pithy content for a social media space that's very, very, very crowded.
Well, again, thank you so much, Kat, for running over a little bit, and thank you everyone who stayed with us. These have been incredible insights on how to increase our revenue and particularly tap into our individual donors and our communities, both for our annual fund, our major givers, and engaging our board as well. So we really appreciate your time and perspectives for this discussion today, and look forward to continuing them in the future. So please follow up with Kat. And again, as a reminder, everyone who registered for today's event will receive an email with recording, the slide deck, the transcript, and links very soon. And we'd also appreciate your completing the evaluation form, the link of which you'll see when you exit and in the follow-up email. And then we want to thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to hopefully seeing you at our next webinar on Thursday, September the 25th, on the topic of leadership strategies during periods of unpredictability, presented by La Piana Consulting's senior consultants, Humberto Camarina and Ali Carrella. So please let the league know however we can be of assistance. Thank you again, Kat, for a wonderful, informative webinar, and we'll look forward to wishing you a great rest of the week and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.